Here's a question. What would happen if a hostile government seized control of our nation's food supply? Would Americans relent and submit to avoid starvation? Communist China is gradually moving in to control the agricultural industry in Africa. Appearing on this week's episode of The Global Lane, Kip Tom, a former U.S. ambassador to the UN, explains why Chinese dominance of the global food supply would pose a danger to Africa and the world, including the United States.
The reality is we tend to go in, the United States goes in with capacity and compassion and gives the humanitarian aid through the World Food Program and a lot of other organizations. But the reality is the Chinese Communist Party goes in through every country in Africa, investing in infrastructure and other projects and actually capturing the country's abilities natural resources. But their ultimate goal is to have Africa be the breadbasket for the country of China to feed their 1.4 billion people.
Well, what specifically then is China doing to make Africa its food basket? What specifically are they doing?
Well, I think there's a number of elements that China's exercising. One is they go in, as I said, they build these death spirals. You may have one country or many of the countries across Africa take a World Bank loan out for building bridges, roads, dams, any kind of infrastructure you can imagine, and then they default or can't make the payment. China comes in and buys that debt out for a minimal amount, and then the country's beholden to them. And they usually get natural resources and other elements of what the country can offer to them to support the Chinese Communist Party and the needs of the people of China. So you go into Africa and you see it firsthand what's going on. I mean, you go into the capital of Zimbabwe, Harare, you go there. The Chinese, you'll see a sign on every street corner, every street vendor is Chinese. They've displaced the African workforce. They got cameras on every street corner. We've seen that everywhere. We also see China coming in and building military installations in Djibouti, South Africa as well. So China wants to seize control of the continent of Africa. And it's not about the mining and the critical minerals. It's about agricultural productivity.
Well, you mentioned that South Africa, China President Xi Jinping was in South Africa this week, strengthening his ties with that country at the BRICS conference. Also, Chinese officials this week visited Nigeria to meet with that country's leadership. And, of course, in recent years, you mentioned this, China has aggressively courted and influenced numerous African countries to work food, trade, and investment deals. So what does that mean for the United States and the world?
Well, I think, one thing that COVID exposed to us, as well as the Ukrainian war, was the supply chains that were critical to the United States in producing food, fiber, and energy. When you look at a nation's power, it's based upon four critical elements: economic, military, diplomatic, and informational. I will add two other elements to that, and that is food and energy. And when you look at Africa, China is looking at that, and they want to capture the ability to produce food, get the energy production that they need for their own nation, and that's why they're so focused. They want to get away from dealing with the United States, period.
Well, I know they're even moving into the U.S. here. I mean, we've seen them buy up some farmland. What is that risk?
That's a significant risk. I think we're going to be dealing with in a very short order, whether it's on the federal level and state level is already working on it. The reality is I'm more concerned about the Chinese Communist Party and different elements of the country coming in and buying companies that hold intellectual property that's been developed here in the United States. And once they buy that company, they can then convert that intellectual property that we've worked on here in the United States, done the research and development, and move that over into China and benefit themselves at a very low cost. So I'm more concerned about their investments in our country, taking companies to get the intellectual property.
And back to the food, though, if they control food, the food supply and food markets around the world, how dangerous is that for the American people?
Food is power. We need to remember that. And this is very dangerous for the United States. So one of the warnings I would offer to the United States is let's make sure that we have a regulatory environment that lets us onshore more of our critical building blocks to produce food, fiber, and energy. That would be replacing, for instance, fertilizer that comes from Russia or Belarus or China, or critical components to build the crop care products that we protect our crops with from insects and weeds and other diseases that come out of China. So the United States, this is a wake-up call. And we could be a food power, and we could use it in a manner that benefits the United States, but our friends and allies around the world.
Well, there's a lot Congress could do about it, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Former U.S. Ambassador to the UN Agencies for Food and Agriculture, Kip Tom, thank you for sharing your time and insights. We appreciate it.
I appreciate your time today and your audiences. Thank you.
Excellent interview there, Gary. Thank you. Also this week on The Global Lane, we'll have more on that urgent prayer request for a kidnapped Syrian pastor threatened with execution. And the premiere this week of the great American family film, Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. You can catch The Global Lane tonight on the CBN News Channel at 8:30 Eastern. You can also see it on the CBN News app or